The first time I saw Karen, she was pruning her roses with the kind of aggressive precision that made it look like she was cutting enemies out of her life rather than dead petals. She wore a tailored blazer, even in 90-degree heat, and her blonde hair was pulled into a bun so tight it seemed to challenge the very air around her. She didn't wave when we moved in. She measured our lawn with a clipboard, twice. My wife, Camille, noticed the stares right away. Camille doesn't scare easy. She's warm, but formidable. Smart as hell, the kind of woman who can hold a courtroom in the palm of her hand. Literally. Because what Karen didn't know when she forced Camille to join the HOA board was that my wife wasn't just another homeowner. She was a high-level federal investigator. But that was months away. When we first bought the house, it was supposed to be quiet, peaceful. We just relocated from D.C. to Suburban, Colorado, tired of the city grind, looking for a place to breathe and raise our son. The neighborhood was called Whispering Pines, but the irony was too thick. Nothing whispered here. Not the gossip, not the lawnmowers, and definitely not Karen. It started small, a pink note tucked under our doormat. Trash bins must be hidden from view at all times. The next day we received an email. The mailbox flag is not HOA regulation red. Please repaint within 72 hours. Camille raised her eyebrow and said, "We just got here and we're already being watched?" She's like a suburban drone strike, I joked. But Camille didn't laugh. Karen introduced herself 2 weeks later, not with a pie or a smile, but with a letter and a clipboard. "This neighborhood has standards," she said, eyes scanning Camille like she was scanning for a threat. "We expect full participation. We need young blood on the HOA board. You'll do nicely." Camille blinked. "Excuse me? You have a legal background, don't you? It's public record. You'd be useful. We vote on new board members next week. I'll nominate you." "I haven't agreed to anything," Camille replied. Karen smiled. It wasn't a smile. It was a warning dressed in teeth. The vote passed, not because Camille agreed, but because Karen ran the meetings like a courtroom where only she had the gavel. Camille was unanimously elected after Karen conveniently amended a bylaw allowing emergency appointments. By the third meeting, Karen was already dictating tasks. "You'll handle community disputes, budget audits, and code enforcement oversight." She slid Camille a thick folder labeled Compliances and Violations. Camille played it cool. She nodded, took the file, and said nothing. I knew that face. That was her predator mode. Things escalated fast. Karen started assigning Camille to visit residents whose lawns were overgrown by 1.5 inches or who had unregistered solar fixtures. Camille documented everything: emails, texts, recordings. She noticed discrepancies in fines. Black families fined more often. Elderly veterans randomly audited more than others. The deeper she looked, the worse it got. "She's weaponizing the HOA," she told me one night, "extorting homeowners, targeting minorities, rerouting budget for her own upgrades. I need time to build the case."
"You going to out her?" Camille looked at me, stone calm. "Oh, I'm going to bury her." But Karen must have sensed the shift. One evening, a police cruiser pulled into our driveway. 2 officers stepped out. "Ma'am, we've received a complaint from your HOA president regarding harassment and intimidation." Camille didn't flinch. "Did she tell you I'm on the board?" "She stated you've been disruptive, hostile, and threatening. She also reported you've been accessing resident files illegally." I stepped forward. "That's ridiculous. She's doing her job. Karen put her on the board." "Sir, we'll need to see identification and speak to your wife privately," the officer said. Camille nodded and pulled a badge from her wallet. Not her HOA badge, but her federal ID. "Camille Johnson, Office of the Inspector General, Department of Justice. Everything I've been doing is part of a federal investigation into discriminatory housing practices and HOA abuse. And now that you've entered this property without cause, congratulations, you've just made yourself part of it." The younger cop blinked. The older one cleared his throat. Excuse us. Karen's plan had backfired. She thought Camille was just another suburban wife she could manipulate. But what Karen didn't know was that Camille had been gathering evidence for weeks. Everything was documented. Every fraudulent fine, every racially targeted citation, every embezzled dollar. The next HOA meeting was standing room only. Camille showed up with a projector, a printed dossier, and 3 members from the DOJ watching silently from the back. Karen didn't stand a chance. But that wasn't the end. Karen had one more move left in her, and it was going to cost her everything. Karen didn't show up to the next morning's hearing voluntarily. The summons came at 7:43 a.m. sharp. A knock on her door, a uniformed officer, and 2 federal agents flanking him. Camille stood behind them, her expression unreadable. She wasn't gloating. She didn't need to. Karen stood in her doorway wearing a silk robe and a smirk that cracked at the edges. "This is a mistake," she said, voice brittle. "No, Karen," Camille replied, holding up a sealed envelope. "The mistake was thinking no one would ever challenge you." Karen was escorted out, still clutching her phone, muttering about calling a lawyer, the mayor, the governor, anyone. But Camille had done her homework. No one was returning her calls now. Her power had come from fear, from bureaucracy, from the illusion of untouchability, and now that illusion was bleeding out in the sunlight. The Whispering Pines HOA board was disbanded within 48 hours. A special investigation team took over. Residents who had been fined unfairly were reimbursed from the HOA's emergency reserve fund, which, as it turned out, Karen had been using to renovate her patio, fund trips to wine country, and even pay off a cousin's mortgage. Camille didn't stop there. With the help of the DOJ's Civil Rights Division, she helped launch a pilot program in the state legislature to provide oversight of HOA boards, particularly those with repeated abuse complaints. Whispering Pines became the cautionary tale at the center of that movement. News vans lined our cul-de-sac for a week. But while the community rallied around Camille, Karen retreated into a spiral of paranoia. She tried filing a countersuit, claiming Camille had coerced her way onto the board under false pretenses. Her lawyer dropped her after discovering the reams of digital and paper evidence Camille had gathered. Doctored financial reports, forged fines, voice recordings with Karen referring to residents by racist nicknames. Then came the criminal charges: wire fraud, civil rights violations, embezzlement, conspiracy to defraud, misuse of HOA funds. The state attorney general added a separate charge of housing discrimination based on race at age. One by one, the pillars of Karen's perfect suburban kingdom crumbled, until all that was left was her bitter silence on the courthouse steps. But Camille wasn't done yet. You see, buried in the audit was something Karen had tried to erase, a forged document transferring common land easement rights to a company she secretly owned. She had essentially sold public property to herself, fencing off walking trails, pond access, and a children's park to raise property values on her rental homes. It was the final nail in her coffin. And that's where the revenge became poetic. With the easement fraud uncovered, the affected land was returned to public use, but with a twist. Camille partnered with the Parks Department and a local Veterans Foundation to convert the space into a memorial garden dedicated to underrepresented federal agents and military service women. They named it the Camille Johnson Justice Grove. Karen had stolen that land to build personal profit. Camille reclaimed it to build legacy. I'll never forget the opening ceremony. The whole neighborhood showed up. People who hadn't spoken to one another in years were hugging, shaking hands, sharing stories. Camille stood in front of the new stone monument as a chorus of kids sang the national anthem. Her face didn't show triumph, just peace. And Karen? She watched from across the street,
peeking through the blinds of her now rented home. The property was in her ex-husband's name now. She had lost ownership in the civil suit. All that remained was a bitter view of everything she could no longer control. That night, as we sat on the porch, sipping sweet tea under the stars, Camille leaned into me and said, she thought she was building an empire. Turns out, she was digging her own grave. We both laughed. Months passed, life settled. The roses in Karen's yard grew wild without her pruning shears. The gates she once locked herself behind now stuck open with rust. Whispering Pines, once a battleground, became a community again. And Camille? She was promoted to lead a new national task force on HOA corruption, a direct result of what she'd done here. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Karen had forced Camille onto the board to exploit her legal expertise. Instead, she'd unleashed a storm. Sometimes, justice doesn't knock on your door. It moves in next door, mows its lawn, and plays by your rules until it's time to rewrite them. And when it does, no clipboard in the world can stop it.